In this video, I'm going to show you how to install a pressure tank. And if you're new to this channel, my name's Josh. This is all about DIY to save a ton of money. So be sure to subscribe, ring that bell so you get notification every time I release a new video, and hammer that like button for me. That's all I ask in return for making this video. We have a lot to go over today, so let's get started. You may be wondering, why do you even need a pressure tank in the first place? If you have a well for your water source, you're going to need a pressure tank. If you have city water, you do not need a pressure tank because the city regulates the pressure and the flow. So with that being said, your well pump will overwork if it's coming directly from the well pump to your faucet. So how exactly does a pressure tank help your well pump from overworking? Well, the idea is very simple. There's a bladder inside of this pressure tank, and then there's pressure even on the outside of the bladder. This one has 38 pounds of pressure to be exact to match our submersible pump. So whenever the water pressure comes into here and fills this up to 60 pounds, it's going to kick off the well pump, and then it's going to hold the 60 pounds of pressure in that bladder. And then whenever you go to use your fixture, this pressure is going to drop down because the bladder is going to contract, pushing this pressure down, and once it hits around 40, it's going to tell the well pump to kick back on, so we maintain a constant pressure between 60 and 40 pounds, and that's how it's going to save your well pump from overworking. That's the importance of having a pressure tank in line with your water system. Here are the supplies I'll be using to install the pressure tank. Here's the pressure tank itself. This is a 20-gallon capacity for this house. This is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. And then from the pressure tank, we need to make our connections down here at the bottom. And right here are all the parts for the connections. And they're going to go into the pressure tank using this 10-inch T. And this is going to hold all of the accessories that you see here. And we're going to begin by our water line that's going to come up through the floor, and then this barbed elbow is going to continue the water line to this barbed adapter, and this is 1 inch. And then it's going to thread into this side of the T. We're going to use the hose clamps to clamp our water lines to make our connections. And then we're going to use this nipple that's 3 inch and 1/4 inch in diameter to go to the pressure switch that's going to monitor the water pressure. Here's our hose bib to drain our pressure tank if we have to. Here's where we're going to monitor the pressure coming out of the pressure tank, and that's going to the house's water lines. Here's a pressure relief valve. Here's how we're going to convert to our CPVC water lines, and this depends on what type of water lines you have. You may be going to PEX, which is very common nowadays, but this house has CPVC. I'll be using Teflon tape and pipe dope to make our threaded connections so we have a watertight seal. If you're interested in any of these parts, I'll put a link to them in the description below. Here are all the tools I'll be using to install this pressure tank. I have a ratchet pipe cutter for cutting the water line, 2 adjustable wrenches to make our threaded connections, a utility knife, a size 8 socket for our hose clamps, a wire stripper, a set of linemen's vice grips, a torch for making our water line connections to the barbed fittings, a tape measure, and a level. Something a little bit unique about this installation: this pressure tank is actually going to be installed in this utility room before we pour the concrete. So typically you would install your pressure tank in a crawl space or basement. And if you're going to be building a house on a slab, then your pressure tank might be in a situation like this as well. So it all depends on your setup. We're going to level up a spot here and place this concrete cookie down just to give us a nice base to set our pressure tank on. I'm going to install all the parts onto this T before placing the T into the tank. I'm going to begin with the barbed adapter, and it's going to thread right into the side of the T here, and that's going to be the water coming in from the well. So I'm going to wrap this in Teflon tape first, going clockwise, and then thread it right into the side of the T here. And I always use pipe dope on my fittings because it makes the seal much better and it acts as a lubricant. Now that I'm hand tightened, I'm going to take my adjustable wrench to tighten it down even more to make sure we got a good seal. Next will be the hose bib. We're going to thread that into this opening here and face it down after it's finally connected all the way. Next will be the relief valve, and it's going to thread right here beside the hose bib. And this I also have facing down as well. This side's going to get the transition to CPVC for this house. And again, if this was for PEX, it would be a PEX transition. I'm now going to install this 3-inch nipple into this 1/4-inch hole. To install this nipple, I'm going to use a pair of vice grips, but a little pipe wrench would be better here. I just don't happen to have mine on me, but this would be definitely more suitable for a small pipe wrench. So we're going to thread this into here now. Next is the pressure gauge, and it's going to be installed right here. And obviously we want this facing out towards where you're going to see it. The pressure switch is going to be installed right on top of this 3-inch nipple. And I have the pressure switch facing towards where the holes for the electric is in through the sides here. It's now ready to be installed onto the tank. I'm going to prep this end of the T to be installed onto the pressure tank. Here at the bottom of the pressure tank, you'll notice this area here. That's where the T gets threaded into. Just got to remove this plug here at the bottom. We're going to thread right into this, coming in through the slide here. Now that we're hand tightened in, I'm going to get my large pipe wrench in on this piece to tighten it up all the way. I'm now going to try to end this to where we're going to be level with the ground here. All right, that looks good right there. Now that we have the pressure tank assembled, we're going to place it right here on this concrete cookie. All right, we got it setting where we want it. Now we got to hook up our water lines and our electric. I'm first going to make my connection from the water line coming from the well to the pressure tank, then from the pressure tank to the CPVC going over to the main water line. I want to elbow over right to the pressure tank, so I'm going to level over to get from here to where I need to cut it first. All right, this doesn't have to be perfectly level or anything, but I just want to make sure the cut looks pretty good. But there. Going to place my hose clamps over the pipe now. Now the barbed elbow. Going to push it in as far as we can push it before heating it up. Now we're just going to heat it up a little bit here, make it a little more pliable. We're going to push that down. I'm going to tighten up my hose clamps right around where the barb fitting is, just about a 1/2 inch from the top of the pipe, and then one down about another 1/2 inch. And you don't want to over tighten these hose clamps because they'll strip fairly easy. So snug it up really well. All right, now we got to make a connection from here to here using that same principle of making the connections about placing the hose clamps on, so very straightforward. I'm going to continue the water coming out from this side of the pressure tank, and it's 3/4 inch CPVC. I'm just going to elbow over and up into this wall space, and then we're going to connect to the main supply of the house. I'm first going to strip this UFB wire, and if you didn't know what UFB wire is, this is direct burial, and this is running in a trench over to the well from my last video like I mentioned. And I'm going to strip this, and this casing is relatively thick, and if you're wondering why it's white, it's because it's a different brand than Romex, and it's a Colonial brand, but it's still considered direct burial. Now that the UFB is stripped, I'm going to strip the 12-2 Romex coming from the panel. In order to strip the ends of the wires, I'm going to use my wire strippers, and since this is 12 gauge, I used a 12 located here on the jaws. And if you want to purchase these, I'll put a link in the description below so you can check them out for yourself. We now need to make the connections in the pressure switch. To open up the pressure switch, I simply gotta just unscrew this little nut on top of the pressure switch box, and that's all there is to it. Now I need to show you some critical information inside of this box. On the inside of this cover, if you take a look down here at the bottom, that is going to be how it needs wired inside. If you take a look at the L1 and L2, that's your line side coming from your panel box. Then the M is going to the well pump. And since the well pump's 220, it's too hot, so I don't have any neutrals here. And then we got our grounds. So that's going to be critical to how you wire into the pressure switch, to pay attention to that. And also while we're looking, if you look at this 40 and 60, that's going to be your high pressure when your well pump kicks off. Then the low pressure is the 40, and that's going to be your well pump kicks on. And I'll show you a little bit more about that here in just a moment on your adjustments if you need to. But that's going to be some great information under here for you to look at. To secure the wires, I must install these two Romex connectors. There's a hole here and a hole here, and one is for each wire. And I'm going to place these inside of the pressure switch now. We just take this lock nut off, place it through, and then tighten the lock nut into place to secure the Romex connector. I'm now going to bring this well pump wire in through this Romex connector, and it doesn't matter which side you use, just as long as you get inside the pressure switch. And then tighten that up around the wire. I'm going to land the ground on this green ground screw here beside the wire. And if you remember from the wiring diagram, these two are going to go to the well pump. And something I'd like to mention, since this is 230 volt, this is actually going to act as a hot. So this white wire is not a neutral, it's going to act as a hot. And we're going to place that right here in this lug. I'm going to place a nice hook onto this wire. You want to hook this so that when you tighten up this screw, it actually pulls the wire towards the screw and not away. And now do the same with the black wire to this screw. I'm now going to rinse and repeat that with this wire coming from the panel. And because this is the line side, we're going to land the lines into these outer terminals and hook our ground up to this other ground screw. All the electrical connections are made here in the pressure switch. Now I'd like to explain a little bit about these two nuts and bolts here. This larger nut and this smaller nut are the two areas in which you would adjust the pressures inside of the tank. But I'd like for you to know that these are preset and you should not have to mess with these. This one's preset for the well pump, and it's going to give us a 60/40, so 60 is the high pressure, 40 is the low. And now I would like to explain to you how these can be adjusted though. So here's a pressure valve, so we can use this as reference. So whenever this pressure tank fills up with pressure, and we can't demonstrate this yet because we don't have power here at this house, but it's going to run this gauge clear up to 60, and then it's going to kick the power off to the pump so it stops at 60. And as we use the water, it's going to drift down to 40, so that's where the 60/40 comes from. Let's say you wanted to increase this pressure, you would simply tighten this larger nut, but when you tighten it, it's going to raise the bottom as well. So if you tighten it a full turn, it would more than likely move it up to around 63, 64, and then move it from 43 to 44 as your low pressure. So the difference will stay the same of 20, but it would move it up and down the gauge depending on if you tighten or loosen it. So if you loosen it, it would drop it by about 4 psi, and if you tighten it, it's going to increase the psi. And you definitely don't want to go real high on this. You want to make sure you keep it within the range of the pressure tank. And now for this one, if you increase the tension on it by tightening it, it's going to raise, let's say we're at 60 and 40, it's going to raise it from 60 to about 63, 64 per turn of the smaller nut, but the 40 on the bottom pressure is going to be the same. So if you made a full turn on this smaller nut, it's going to say raise this to 64. So when our pump kicks on, it's going to push the pressure up to 64 and keep it there. Then when it drops back down, it's going to kick back on at 40. But if you were to tighten this up as well, it would move it up to 44 and then this up to about 64. So to keep this simple, if you tighten this, it's going to increase both pressures. If you tighten this one, it's going to increase the top pressure. And then if the same thing goes, if you loosen this one, it's going to drop both pressures. And if you loosen this one, it's just going to drop the top pressure. Now that we're done at the pressure switch, I'm going to replace this cover and tighten this nut back up. Now that the pressure tank's hooked up, I'm going to throw a little dirt back around this water line. Here's the other end of the yellow wire that's going over to the pressure tank. And if you want to see how I'm going to install the double breaker to go to the pressure tank and wire up this panel box, check out this video. It'll help you out.